Good evening, everyone. This is Pam Stack, and you're listening to Authors on the Air. We're proud to be part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. If you're listening to us live right now, please click the follow button. I'd appreciate it. Tonight, my guest is Frank Zafiros. Frank and I have been trying to do this on the radio for I don't even know how many years, but he's finally here and has a really interesting story. Stay tuned because we're going to go ahead and talk to him in 1 minute. You all have joined me this Friday night. I have a really great guest. Frank is a crime fiction writer. He's known as the River City author. His books are grittier, darker crime fiction. He writes police procedurals, but he also has a really interesting backstory. Without further ado, Frank, I'm glad to welcome you to the show. Frank Zafiros, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great. I'm happy to finally be here. It took us long enough to finally make it happen, didn't it?
It did. I swear. All my fault, and I apologize for that. You know, I keep trying to figure out how I can add another day in the week so I can talk to more authors. And so far I've not been able to, like, wiggle my nose or, you know, cross my arms and blink there. So, but I'm glad you're here now. And I was fascinated by your history. When I was doing a little bit of research on you, I was very surprised to learn that you were in the Army in military intelligence, but as a Czechoslovak linguist, correct?
That is 100% correct.
How did that happen to you? Are you fluent in Czech by any chance? Or was this something you learned while you were in the service?
Yeah, I definitely learned it while I was in the military. They sent me to Monterey, California, to the Defense Language Institute there for about 15 months between the Czech and a little bit of a Slovak follow-on course. And the funny thing about it is when I joined the Army, my Spanish teacher, a wonderful woman named Mrs. O'Halloran, really impressed upon me, hey, you make sure you get to go to the language school. So I wheeled and dealed with my recruiter to make sure that happened, and it did. And then the Army hands you this list of languages and say, okay, pick 6 from column A and 4 from column B, and we guarantee you'll get one of those languages. And so I'm writing down Russian, German, Spanish, all the stuff I want to learn. Oh, Italian, that sounds good. And I started running out of languages, and finally the very last one I wrote down was Czech. And as the Army way is, that's exactly what I ended up with, was my final choice. But hey, they held up their end of the bargain, so you can't complain.
Are you still fluent?
I would say probably not. Language is a perishable skill, and so if you don't use it, it atrophies a little bit. I've been fortunate to run into some Czech speakers a few times since I came back home, and it does come back pretty quickly. When I was in the military, I was probably fluent at the level of a high school graduate native speaker. And, I'm down to the tourist, an impressive tourist level probably now.
So as a Czech linguist, what does that mean when you're in military intelligence? Tell whatever you can tell. I don't want you to give away state secrets, of course, but I'm interested
well, everybody
in
else
knowing
says it seems
what,
like, so.
Yeah, well, right. But let's not go there anyway. So what does being a part of military intelligence and being a Czech linguist actually mean?
Well, it can mean a lot of different things depending on what job you're assigned. The linguist attachment is actually kind of like a kicker to whatever your regular intel job is, and the way the military works, and actually the way the intelligence community works, is they classify intelligence by its source. And so you have human intelligence, or HUMINT. You have signal intelligence, which is like radio traffic, or telephones. That's SIGINT. And my job was in the SIGINT field. So essentially what I did is sit and put headphones on and listen to the little Czech soldiers contact each other back and forth on their radios, and write down what they were doing, and tried to figure out what the code word hawk meant, and who was eagle this week, and what they were up to, and that sort of thing.
Now,
it sounds interesting.
You were back.
It wasn't as
well. Well, I imagine it was a lot of time sitting around doing nothing, or tracking down nothing. But when you were in the service from '86 to '91, was there? Were we actively in Czechoslovakia for some reason? What was going on there? Because I don't remember, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that was right still at the height of the Cold War. Well, you could argue whether it was the height or not, but the Cold War was still definitely waging when I went in '86. This was the Reagan era. And then and the Czechs were part of the Warsaw Pact, which was the Soviet Union's answer to NATO. And so they were on the other side of that Iron Curtain, as potential enemies. That's why we were spying on them. The reality is that the Czechs were, like several of those Eastern European nations, they were rather half-heartedly part of the Warsaw Pact. And I was there in Germany, and there near the end of my tour, when the Velvet Revolution occurred, and they and freedom erupted everywhere in the Czech Republic, and then the wall came down, and I caught the very end of it.
Wow. But what an exciting time if you were going to be there to see the end of that. Pretty cool. So when you got out of the military, you became a police officer in Washington, and you did a lot of different things. You were a patrol officer, a corporal, a detective, and then you entered into leadership roles and became a sergeant. So you commanded not only patrol officers and investigators, but canine officers too, and a SWAT team. Did you enjoy being a police officer or being in law enforcement?
Yeah, I really did. There was a lot of negative that comes with that profession at times, and sometimes we focus on that. But the reality is it's a profession that is very open to opportunity when it comes to doing something meaningful for people. And I was very proud to serve with the men and women that I served with. They were some of the most dedicated, hardworking, conscientious people that I met, that I ever met. And the level of restraint and self-discipline that I saw on display, and the amount of compassion in the face of sometimes vitriol was just it was absolutely amazing. And I saw it more clearly when I was in those leadership roles, because I was watching these people that I was responsible to lead performing in this way, and I was very proud of them. So it was a good career in that respect. On a personal level, it's a good career, because whether you want to get into a leadership role or you just want to kind of change your job every 3 to 5 years, there's a lot of room for lateral movement as well. So you don't have to just do the same exact job for your entire career unless you want to. And if you do, then you can do that as well.
You rose up through the ranks pretty quickly, though, before you retired. You retired as a captain, and even though you weren't there all that long, that's a pretty fast rise through the ranks. I happened to work for a very small police department at one time as their victim advocates, and worked in the detective bureau. So I got to know, a lot of how things operated, as far as, crime investigation and all, and was always on call if there was a violent crime. Was never a homicide when I worked there, and I was there for 2 years. But I did get called out to other municipalities, because I was fairly adept at handling victims. and, calming them down and getting them the services they needed. But I will say you struck a chord with me when you said compassionate, because the city that I worked in was kind of a microcosm of the country, I think. It was a third white Americans, a third Spanish, and a third African American, and went from very well-to-do to very, very poor and living in housing projects and so on. And I saw those law enforcement officers at the street level, the patrol officers, who displayed so much compassion and kindness to the residents of the community where they patrolled, whether it be, buying food for someone, getting groceries, taking them here or there, wherever on their off-duty time. So I think you're right to go into that profession for the most part. For the most part, men and women do it because they want to make their community better. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, every one of us who ever sat in front of a hiring board and was asked the question, why do you want to be a police officer, answered some variation of I want to help people. I want to make a difference. I want to be part of something, in this community. It's unfortunate because the job the job itself can be a grind, and it can wear on some of those noble intentions, and it can wear on some of those very beautiful personality traits. And you have to actively swim upstream against those tendencies to become a little bit a little burnt out and a little bit bitter.
I can imagine.
You have to find ways to work against it. But people do. I mean, and I think we're in a better place today than even when I started my career, because the emotional health of the officers is something that most agencies pay attention to from the very beginning of their career now, to try to make sure that burnout doesn't happen, to make sure people don't get bitter and they don't get cynical, or at least not as quickly and as deeply, because like I said, it's the nature of the job. It really is.
Yeah, it really is. I agree with you. So I also know that you claim to have started writing when you were 13 years old, and I love that. I love that you remembered writing as a teenager. Why did you start writing when you were a kid? What compelled you to write stories?
I think that's the kind of question that if I was a musician, I think people would understand if I said, hey, I felt like I needed to play guitar, and I think it's that way with a lot of writers too. It's just, I mean, you answered it with the question. I felt compelled. Felt like I had stories to tell, and I wanted to make that connection in that way, and so I just started doing it. Just felt natural. And yet you have written so many different styles of books in different genres. I did not know that you wrote a children's book series about a hockey player. And I did not know that you've written under a different name as well. But you have quite a bookshelf full of books with your name on them. Congratulations. How many books to date have you written? The last time I counted it was 20. I'm not sure if I counted nonfiction when I did that. I'd have to sit down and do it real quick here. But most of them are in the crime fiction realm. The two that you mentioned that were hockey related, I wrote under my given name. And the Sam the Hockey Player series, I've only got the first book of that finished now. It's called The Hardest Hit, and it focuses on that 9 to 12 year age and older young adult. But I'm going to be doing another 3 or 4 of those, so that'll be a bona fide series here soon. But the overwhelming number of my books they fall under the mystery genre. I do tap into a few different subgenres. I mean, I've got the police procedurals. in the River City series, but I've got the straight-up detective mystery first-person kind of type of subgenre in my Stefan Kopriva mysteries, and then some noir as well. And then I don't know exactly what Eric Bietner and I are writing, if it's like dark black humor noirish action or
it must be. It must be.
I'm not sure how to classify it. We're writing Bietnerism, I guess. But I've got a couple books with him, and so I like, and then I wrote a pretty hard-boiled series with Jim Welski called the Anya Trilogy. So under the mystery flag, I'm flying a lot of different colors of the subgenres.
Well, that's wonderful. It is interesting to me that you have a relatively, in a short period of time, you've produced a lot of product. In a relatively short period of time, you've been published and have a lot of books. But more interesting to me than that is that you have really ventured beyond just doing the straight police procedural where you may have started, and you're willing to go ahead and kind of, like you said, fly under a bunch of different flags there, which is really interesting. You also don't seem to mind writing with another author, which is, I think, kind of a different kind of animal in itself. So maybe we can talk about that, because you just sent me the most beautiful autographed copy of your new book that you co-authored with Lawrence Kelter called The Last Caller. I'd like to start there, if you don't mind. It seems like an appropriate place to talk about, or at least to get the conversation going with this new book of yours. Tell us, first of all, a little bit about the story.
The Last Caller is it's set in New York, and it features a NYPD detective named John Mochia, who he and his partner catch a case in the very first pages of the novel of a rich young woman who is murdered, and they have to solve it just like every other case that's come their way. But there's something going on with John Mochia that the reader probably will become pretty suspicious about early on, and then is made privy to maybe a third of the way into the book that adds a wrinkle to what is essentially a detective police procedural. And I really don't want to say a whole lot more than that, because it's kind of fun to discover on your own there.
It is. I don't want any spoilers from the show. How is it that you teamed up with Mr. Kelter to write this book? What happened? How did this come about?
Well, if I remember right, he and I were part of a novel anthology, a boxed set that came out, and so we crossed paths on that project. And he contacted me and said, "Hey, I noticed, you've worked with other authors before, and I've got this story bouncing around in my head, but I really want it to have the credibility or the realism of a police procedural, and you've got a background and you're a writer. What do you think about writing it together?" And at that point, I had written books with 4 other authors. Initially, wrote one with Colin Conway called Some Degree of Murder, and then I wrote 3 with Jim Wilski, the Anya Trilogy, and then Eric Bietner and I wrote 2, actually we just finished the 3rd, in the Cam and Bricks Job series, and I wrote a book with Bonnie Paulson called The Trade-Off. And in each of those, we took the approach of, I wrote one character, the other author wrote another character. We wrote in the first person, and we alternated narrative chapters, so it was kind of a dual first-person narrative. First one character, then the next character, back and forth. So as the reader, you got that intimacy that you get with the first person. You get to be in the head of the character, but you also got 2 characters' viewpoints, so you knew more than either character, and you got to see the story from both perspectives. And of course, most of the time these 2 characters were at odds with each other in some fashion. And I really liked that model. It was fun to write. There were some benefits to it from a motivation standpoint and from a characterization standpoint, and it was great. And so I told that to Larry, and he said, yeah, I think that's wonderful, but I don't want to do it that way. And so I said, okay. So I mean, he wasn't a jerk about it at all. He was just like.
Before you go forward, I want to make a comment about what you just explained. It's an unusual process for sure for co-authors to write a book. But here's what strikes me and what makes me all the more interested into diving in your books is that oftentimes when I read where there are two main characters, the voice is not different enough. There's not enough distance between the characters. So I always, whether it's two men, a man and a woman, two women, there's a certain cadence, a certain tone, a certain vocabulary that each character should have. And if they're not distinctly different, then it doesn't make for that enjoyable a read, especially when it comes to dialogue. But it seems to me that the way that your model was set up, you don't leave any of that to chance. It just cannot happen because you are really two distinctly different voices. And so your characters are going to have a different voice and a different timbre and cadence and vocabulary. Kudos to you for doing that. I mean, that's an amazing thing from a reader standpoint.
Well, thank you. I mean,
wrote like that. Yeah. I mean, did that thought ever cross your mind, by the way?
Oh, for sure. That's one of the advantages of it is that you're getting two very different voices, and as a writer you can accomplish that on your own, but it's obviously has to be very purposeful, and it might be difficult, but when you're writing just the one character. It's in your voice, and the other character is being written in the other author's voice, and that part just takes care of itself for sure.
Right. Did you when you've used this model with the four previous co-authors, did you have a story Bible or an outline that where you highlighted the arcs throughout the story, and you said, well, this is your turn, this is your turn. Did you alternate chapters in? Like, did you write chapter 1 and then your co-author wrote chapters 2 and then you read chapter 2 and wrote chapter 3? I mean, is it kind of like the domino effect? Or did you was it all just seat of the pants? I want to know what the process was like.
When you're writing a book by yourself, you can say, hey, what would happen if, and then start writing by the seat of your pants if you want to, and it can work because if you get mad at yourself and change directions, it's an internal problem. When you're working with somebody else, you kind of have to have at least some guideposts, because I certainly wouldn't want to write something that would completely negate the work that the other writer did on his or her chapter. And so some coordination is definitely necessary. So I would say we planted, guideposts and said, hey, here's where we're going. It was a little different with each writer, but generally we at least had our guideposts through the first half of the book until we kind of reached the turning point, and then we'd have to get back together on it and figure out where are we going from here.
Absolutely.
And then of course the ending is always a discussion.
I'm thinking that I'm thinking about when I get in my car to go someplace. I can pretty much pick and choose wherever I want to go, and I may have a destination in mind, but how I choose to get there is my business. Whereas if I had a passenger in the car or someone else who was driving part of the way, we'd absolutely have to plan it out. So, or at least to a certain extent, you need a road map somewhere along the line. I'm equating what you're saying to that analogy, and I may be wrong, but it's in layman's terms.
No, I think your analogy is bang on. Yeah, the only thing I'd add to it is that imagine if every 10 miles or so you pulled over and switched drivers. So you definitely would need to be coordinating the map at that point. And so we did. we coordinated that, and then it was pretty exciting because you'd write your chapter and you'd ship it off to your partner, and then sometimes in a day, sometimes in a week. I mean, however long it was taking, you'd get a chapter back, and so it was kind of it's really a neat process because you're writing a story and reading a story at the same time, so you get to have a little bit of that excitement.
I would imagine it'd be exciting. Yeah, exciting to see. I wonder what's happening now, and then it seems to me it would be a very interesting way to write. But you said this time with Larry it was different, that he didn't want to do it like that. So how did you come to grips?
Well, he just said he didn't think he wanted to do it that way, and I said, okay, how do you want to do it? And he said, well, usually I like to write in the third person, but I think you prefer the first, so I'm more than willing to do that. But I'd like it to be just a single character, and so I was the one who was a little bit reticent at that point, just because I was concerned for exactly what you pointed out earlier was the strength of the dual first-person narrative, one of the things that just took care of itself, that character voice, that if we were both writing the same character, I was a little bit worried that the character was going to sound schizophrenic, like for one chapter he'd sound this way, and so, but Larry's idea was a good idea, and then we put he had a good skeleton of an idea, and we hung some pretty good meat on it and started getting excited about it. So we got started on it. And the other thing we did different was in the other books, it was one chapter at a time. I wrote chapter 1, they wrote chapter 2, I wrote chapter 3, back and forth, always one chapter at a time.
Right.
Almost for every chapter or every book. And in this case, we kind of wrote in chunks. Like sometimes it would be a chapter, sometimes you'd write 2 or 3 chapters. You'd kind of go from guidepost to guidepost, whether it was a single or multiple chapters. And so we did that, and then went through the revision process. And when we got to the end of it all, my fears were pretty well unfounded. I mean, John Mochia has a very singular voice. It's not my voice and it's not Larry's voice, but it is a singular voice. And it was kind of funny when I was looking at it after I got the copies from Down Out Books. It had been a while since I'd read it, and I was thumbing through and reading different passages just like you do when you get your book from the publisher. And I realized there were parts I couldn't remember if I wrote that or Larry wrote it, or I knew I either wrote it or did some revision on it, because we revised, each other pretty mercilessly too, to try to make things always better. And so at the end of it all, all my fears were unfounded. So it ended up working out, but it was a very of the 5 different authors, that was the most different process, very different from the other 4.
Well, I've heard a lot of ways that books are co-authored, and one of the ways that I hear it most often is that, we write the story outline, and then one author writes through, and then the second one goes back and edits it, and then the first one goes back, and then back and forth like that. But this way, it seems to me that as long as the voice of your main characters remains the same, it would be an interesting thing to have the point of view from your co-author. So kudos to you on that. So here's my question. When you were writing before, not with Larry this time, but in the first model we talked about, while you were waiting for the following chapter to come back to you so you could write your chapter, what did you do in those times? Did you edit? Did you begin another book? Did you kick back and say, wow, this is going pretty good, I have a little bit of a break, I don't have to be like pounding out my word count? What do you do in the time between getting the chapters back to you so that you can add your part?
It really depends on if I had a solo work in progress going, I would be working on that. If I was doing editing on something like that, pretty much whatever I'd be doing if I wasn't working on that that project, I just go back to that. Because you never know. I mean, there were times where I'd send the book back to one of my partners, and you know, their chapter would come back at the end of the day. You know, I'd send it in the morning and get it back in the evening. And there'd be other times
Wow.
where I'd send it, and you know, in a week and a half might go by, or a couple of weeks, and it was the same for me. Sometimes I'd get it in the morning, and I'd have a new chapter for them by the evening to send, and sometimes it, you know, took me 2 or 3 weeks, just depending on life and the story and so forth. So it's always good to have something else that you're working on at the same time.
Right. Right.
And you know, a lot of writers will work on more than one project at a time just to have that palate cleanser, kind of that mental palate cleanse between different projects, and so I think it provided that as well. But I'll tell you what I did more than anything was wait with anticipation, because that's part of what was so cool about that process is you don't know exactly what you're going to get back. I mean, you know, all right, I know that, you know, Cam's going to go to the drugstore and deal with that problem, and that's all I know. And then I get it back, and here's this, you know, hilarious or, you know, frightening or just heart-wrenching or whatever it is that, you know, I mean, it's pretty cool. You're reading a book while you're writing it when you're doing that.
It is cool. I like the sound of it. I really do. It's so fascinating to me. What are you working on now, Frank?
I just finished the revisions for the third book that Eric Beetner and I wrote, the Getaway List, which is at least the title now, and we sent it to Down Out Books, and they're looking at a 2018 release. And Larry and I decided to work on another project together, so I'm doing the first round of revisions on that. It's actually a third-person, more of a procedural. There's 2 or 3 main characters, and so we wrote it in the same fashion as we wrote The Last Caller, but we went third person and multiple viewpoints, and that's called Fallen City. And then I'm working on my final, or my next River City novel, the 5th one in the series, called In the End. It's been since 2011 since the last River City novel came out, so I'm way overdue. And I'm really enjoying getting to spend time with these characters again.
Well, let's talk about the River City series, because you've kind of modeled this on Spokane, Washington. Is that correct?
Yeah, River City is a very thinly veiled Spokane in a lot of ways. There's a few you know, things that I took some liberties with, both in terms of geography and reality, but I did use my experience living there and policing there, and used it as a model for River City.
Are you having fun writing books, Frank?
Oh yeah, I mean, you're 13 years old and you think I want to be a writer, and then realize, well, you know, nobody's just going to start sending you checks if you announce, hey, I'm a writer, so you got to have some other kind of a career. And through all of that, through the military, through my time as a police officer, I dreamt of being where I am right now, and that is being able to work on whatever I want to work on, and to do it with most of my attention. So I think if you're not having any fun with art, not that art can't be difficult, but if you're not having any fun with it, then you know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it.
Interesting. Do you still teach writing classes?
Fiction, you mean?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I haven't in a couple of years. I've got some workshops that are, you know, pretty much plug and play. My wife and I just moved to Central Oregon, and I've been reaching out to local bookshops, and usually those kind of workshops work really well if you do it in association with a bookstore. So we might get something up and running here in the next year or so, but I haven't in a couple of years.
And do you still do your podcast?
Well, I just got it started up, so yeah, I will be broadcasting the first episode. It's not live, but I'll be dropping, I guess, the first episode on the 5th, I think, of June 5th or 6th, whatever that Tuesday
with
is.
Dave Zeltzman, right? With Dave Zeltzman.
Yeah, Dave Zeltzman was my first guest.
He's brilliant.
And
then one of my dear friends, Danny Gardner, whose first novel is just spectacular. Just spectacular.
Yeah, it's a great book. It's a great book.
Yeah, it really is. And I see all the people coming up. Steve Hamilton, who's coming on my show. Sarah Chen, who's been on one of the others. Congratulations on the success of that. I'm so happy. You're on SoundCloud, correct?
That's the main place I'm feeding it from, but it'll go through iTunes and Stitcher and all those other places too, and it'll be up on my website too, franksafiro.com.
So tell everybody where your website is, and first of all, tell them the name of your podcast, because I think everybody should listen to podcasts. I think that podcasts are so much fun, and if you don't have a chance to meet in person the authors that you love to read, you should listen to podcasts. Everybody's. And Eric Beetner's and Steve Loudon's is a great podcast. Stephen Campbell, who started off on my network, is doing, the Author Biz, another great podcast. Go and listen to these. Give everybody the name of your podcast, please.
Well, first I got to say you're absolutely right. And Eric and Steve's broadcast, Writer Types, is really cool. And it kind of strikes me as it's almost like a morning talk show, the way that they produced it.
Yes.
It's pretty quick and snappy and witty, and they have several guests. And when I start thinking about doing a podcast, I wanted to do one that was a little bit more like a late night talk radio show where somebody could call in and the guest would talk for an hour maybe or something. And my stepson suggested one called I think it's called Don't Make It Weird, or You Made It Weird. A comedian, the guy that's on Crashing now. I'm blanking on his name, but he's a pretty funny guy.
If there's the TV involved, I don't have a TV. So I'm sorry.
Well, but I really liked how he his show. They just basically got on there and talked. Pete Holmes is who I was thinking of. And so I wanted to do something somewhere in between that, where people could come on. We could talk about, their writing. We could talk about writing in general, the genre of film, and then, art and life. Let's just talk about life. And in both of the first two episodes so far, my discussions with Dave Zeltzman and then Danny Gardner's on for episode 2. We just recorded that. We do talk a lot about writing, but we talk about other stuff as well. The name of the podcast is Wrong Place, Right Crime, as in like I'm a writer, right crime. Yeah. Kind of a play on, right place, wrong time, and those types of phrases. I actually have to credit my wife with coming up with the title. But it fits in a lot of different ways because at some point, once I feel like it's a little bit more established with a good foundation of crime writers that have been on the show, I want to bring in the eclectic guest every once in a while, the songwriter or the actor or some other person that does some other kind of art and get their take on crime fiction and life and just have fun with it. And
it's
so,
a lot of fun to shake it up like that. It's a lot of fun. I will tell you, as someone who's done over 1,000 interviews, it is tons of fun when you just change the whole thing up and you do something completely unexpected. Not only for your audience, but as a host, it's a lot of fun to do that. We have some remaining time, and if you don't mind staying with me, I want to talk to you a little bit more because you have such an interesting life, and I'm so glad that I kind of don't want to let you go because we've been talking about doing this for a long time. So if you have a little bit more time to stay with me, I want to talk to you a little bit.
Of course I do. I'd be happy to stay.
So thank you. So there is a picture of you, and on your website, and you're sitting at a table with all your books, and there's all these shelves in the background. Is that at a bookstore? Or is that in your home?
Yeah, that's at the I wish I had a chair like that in my No, that is at the Seattle Mystery Bookshop, if I remember. And I
you
think
go.
it would have been when my third book came out, Beneath
Oh,
the
you're
Weeping Sky.
actually the last caller. The last caller is on there, so I know it's a recent picture.
Oh, you're talking about that one. Okay, yeah, that is also at the
Yeah.
Seattle Mystery Bookshop. Jim Thompson
Yeah.
took that shot of me, and he came down and said hello. And that's a bookstore like many of the bookstores all across this country, that the independent bookstores, particularly the mystery bookstores. You go in there, and it really doesn't matter if this is your first book and nobody's heard of you, or you are Lawrence Block or whoever. They treat you so well, and they're such nice people. And I tell you, I love going and doing that. It's just it's a blast.
It's a lot of fun. I can't go into a bookstore except for about an hour before it closes. Otherwise, I will spend the day on the floor flipping through books of authors I haven't read yet. So I'm so cautious about time spent in a bookstore. I would be poor. I would be living under a bridge somewhere, but I'd have a lot of books. So I understand what you're saying about those type of bookstores, because it's hard if you are a bibliophile and if you love to read to want, and I'm not talking the big brick and mortar stores that are well known. I don't have anything against them. They serve a purpose, thank God for them. But with the resurgence of indie bookstores, Frank, I think it has broadened opportunities for a lot more writers. Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely. The indie bookstores have treated me wonderfully. I mean, I'm not in the Walmarts. I'm not in the Barnes and Nobles. I'm not on the on the cap ends or whatever. And so when I've gone to the independent bookstores and said, "Hey, I'm a local writer. Here's my book. I'd love to do I've got a new one coming out. I'd love to do an appearance. Would you be willing to?" They've just been wonderful about it, and have treated me so well. And so to see them adapting to the new publishing reality and being able to survive and maybe even thrive in it, it makes me happy. I don't have anything against the big bookstores either, to be honest with you, but I don't go there to buy my books. If I want a hardcover book and I'm going to get it in a bookstore, I'm going to get it from an independent bookstore.
Sure,
plain and simple.
because they're the ones who are supporting you too. Yeah,
exactly.
They're supporting you as well. And so it's only right. And there are some magnificent independent bookstores. I live in Southwest Florida, and we have a lot of really great bookstores over here on Sanibel Island and Captiva. By the way, if you ever come to Florida, please let me know so I can go and see you for sure. Have car and book will travel, and there's nothing I value more. I think and you know this for me because I told you an autographed book is part of my treasured collection. It never will leave my site. And I'll tell you, I told you earlier that I called you late because I had been talking to, I don't know if you heard me, I was talking to my brother, and that's why I was late dialing into the studio. But I told my brother, when I die, you are to take all my autographed books and put them in the crematory with me, because whether I'm going north or south, I want something to read. And he thought that was really funny, and he says, "Oh, well, which shelf is that?" And I said, "You don't understand. It's the entire 4 shelves. Those are all the signed books." And he laughed. He said, "You're kidding me." And I said, "No, I talk to authors for a living, I meet authors." So books to me are air. And I understand what you're saying about bookstores too. I love being in them. I love the feel of them, the smell of them. I love the excitement and the wonder, and I like seeing kids in bookstores too. To me that's a good thing. That's passing on a good legacy. Frank, you don't have a lot of downtime because you're writing so much, but what do you enjoy doing in the time when you're not writing?
I like to read, of course, and I enjoy good movies and good television series. So my wife and I will often binge watch whatever series we're getting into. I'm a big hockey fan, so a big part of the year. There's always a game available, and when I lived in Spokane, I played a couple of times a week as well, and
Really?
going to see how that works out
Wow.
down here. Yeah, just recreationally. I'm nothing special at it, but neither were the other guys, so it was fun.
There you go.
We just
It
get
was,
out,
there it
get
is.
out there and skate around. And I try every so often to pick up the guitar and learn how to play it, and that's just something I don't have much natural ability at. So every piece is very hard earned, and it's it's just one of those things
I know that feeling.
people make look so
Yes.
easy, but it's so hard. And
It is.
but I love it. So if you're only playing for yourself and maybe your loved one, then you can be pretty poor at it and still feel pretty good about it. And so I like to do that as well. So those are some of the things. I enjoy some good video games as well, the intelligent ones. So, which is kind of funny. I'm almost 50 years old and I enjoy video games. So don't tell anybody I told you that.
I won't say a word. No one will hear it from my lips, I will tell you. I was going to ask you what is something we'd be surprised to learn about you, but you've now just spilled your guts, so the secret's out. You like video games. But what else would we be surprised to learn about you?
Boy, that's a good question. Let's see. I'm struggling with that one. One of the things I did after I retired from the police department is I got into a program as a consultant teaching police leadership. And so since 2013, I've been all over North America, U.S. and Canada, teaching a pretty intensive 3-week leadership program to different agencies from Saskatchewan, Canada to Albuquerque, New Mexico to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, just kind of all over North America. So
wonderful.
That's something different anyway. I don't know if people don't know it or not.
It is, and it's a pay it forward thing for you, I suspect. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely is, and it definitely also made leaving the job a little easier too. You feel like you're still giving back to the profession, and
Absolutely.
so it's good. I was just going to say, when you work at a particular agency, you're very myopic in your views, and you see, my agency is full of wonderful people who are dedicated and hardworking and care and are trying to make a difference. And then, and that's true. But then when I got out into the bigger world and went to these different agencies, and what I discovered is that the men and women who come to this profession, by and large, almost exclusively are hardworking, dedicated men and women who care and want to make a difference. And so being able to work with them a little bit more and to try to have some positive influence, particularly in the leadership realm, because those people are going to go out and have influence. And so the ripple effect can be,
sure.
You never know what it can be.
Absolutely. No. And I understand exactly what you're saying. Whose book are you reading right now?
I'm reading, I hope I say his name right, Sean Shirkover's Trigger City.
Yes.
Is the one I just started. And then I've got a couple others that have been sent to me.
Do you stay in your genre when you read?
Some. I definitely read in the genre, but I just went on a tear where I was reading all of Jonathan Tropper's work. And he's definitely not crime fiction.
Definitely.
I'm a history buff. My undergraduate degree was in history, and so I like to have periodically pull out some history books and read those, and so bounce back and forth between fiction and nonfiction that way.
Interesting. When someone asks you what is your profession, what do you tell them?
Well, now I tell them I'm a writer. And I got to tell you, that's a pretty cool thing to be able to say, because it used to be I'd say, well, I'm a police officer, but I also write, and I went through a long time being, the cop who writes or whatever, and now I've reached a point in my life where I'm the writer who used to be a cop, and that's a kind of a nice transition to have gone through.
it's curious to me, why do you, every single person I speak to will not say I'm an author? Why is that?
I guess I can't answer that definitively because I do say it. Do you mean using the term writer instead of author, or just admitting that that's what their profession
Using the
is?
term author instead of writer, saying I am an author. Does it sound too heady, or is it too strong of a word for what you think you do? There seems to be stigma attached to saying, what is your profession? I am an author. I don't know why that is. It's curious to me because I'm so happy to say my author friends, I don't say my writer friends. I say my author friends. I think it's a magnificent thing. Writers are my celebrities. So any author I meet, I'm thrilled, whether they've written a debut, independently published book about butterflies. I'm thrilled to meet them because it's something I can't do. So I'm always curious why people won't say I'm a published author. I'm an author. I think it's amazing.
I don't know what's going on there with other folks. For me, I think I use the term writer because it's broader. I've written a couple. I've written a textbook and some nonfiction, and some coursework and things like that. And so if I say I'm a writer, it includes being a fiction author. Well, I guess being a crime fiction author is kind of under that umbrella.
Sure.
And I think when you start out, you're not an author, right? You can be a writer because you decide to be a writer. You can be like, you know what, I'm a writer, and writers write, and so I'm writing, and now I'm a writer, and not have anything published, not even a blog, but you can be a writer. You become an author when you publish a book, and so I think because a lot of us started out calling ourselves writers because that was a fair thing to say. Nobody could tell us we weren't. Probably just became the habit, even well after we could add author to the list of what kind of writer we were.
Interesting. You define it like that, and I'm thinking, well, maybe writer sounds like a more active word, and author is more of a titled word. So maybe that's what it is. If you are a writer, it is assumed you are writing. If you're an author, that is a title. You have written something. So maybe that's the difference. I don't know. But I just, I just am impressed with all authors and writers. I will tell you that. I'm going to call Eric Beatner, and I'm going to say, Eric, I want to write a book about Frank's life as we know it so far. And Eric agrees to do that. So we're going to write a book about you. What are we going to title it, Frank?
Oh, jeez. Wow. I have no idea. You're gonna double up with Eric Beatner, so there's gonna be dead bodies in this book, whether or not they happened or not. I'd have to think about it. I'm gonna have to be a total wimp and not be able to answer your question, Pam, because titles for me are funny. Sometimes the title comes before the story ever starts. It's like, hey,
right.
This is a great title, and it's going to be about XYZ, but very broad. But the title's there, and then the book will be about XYZ, and it'll just continue from there. But there are other times where title is tough. It's like, well, what's the title of this book? I don't even know. And my first Stefan Kopriva novel, the Waist Deep, I was 2/3 of the way through that book before I realized what the title was going to be. And Eric and I just finished the third Cam and Brick's Job book, The Getaway List, and we didn't have a title by the time we were finishing up with the revisions. We had about 20 titles, but we didn't have one. And so the title of my life is in the latter category. I'm still working to come up with one.
Well, there you go. I'm still working on it. So there you go. There's your title. Frank
Can that be a working
tell everybody
title,
that can be a working title. Tell everyone where we can find you in the webs, please.
Pretty easy, frankzafiro.com. Zafiro is Zafiro, and you can pretty much link to everything from there: my podcast, my blog, and all my novels.
It has been such a pleasure talking to you. I hope you'll come back sometime soon. And maybe you and Eric will come on a show and just do an author in conversation type thing and let me just be the tech and listen to you two speak. Would you do that for me, please?
Oh, that'd be awesome. I'd be pleased as punch to do that.
I wish you all the success in the world, and I hope we bump into each other one of these days, either at a signing or at a conference, because I am known to pop in on those things all the time. And congratulations on the release of your new book. I wish you so much success, Frank, and I'm glad we finally did this.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's been a real pleasure and a long time coming. I'm glad we finally made it happen.
It won't be the last time, I promise, okay? I hope you have a great weekend, and it's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Frank, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
And that's our show for tonight, folks. What a fantastic conversation. Thank you for joining me. Grab Frank Zafiro's new book. You're going to love it. And thank you. I'll talk to you next week. And thank you, Mom and Dad. Good night, all.